technical issues have been getting us down once more. This evening, I'm talking to Halim Gençoglu, who unfortunately cannot come through over the webcam, but we have made a plan, and he is here over the phone. Halim Gençoglu is a professor at the University of Cape Town, and he specializes in Ottoman history. And this means that he also focuses on the Turkish diaspora in Cape Town over the past couple hundred years, and the history of Islam in the Cape. Professor Halim, would you like to add anything to that?
Hi, Robert. Thank you. No, that's quite fine.
Yes.
Thank you for the introduction.
Yes, fantastic. Now, what I would like to start off with you, since this is the big headline character in the history of Cape Islam, would be Bakr Effendi, and the Effendi family in general have been very prolific in their influence on Cape Town itself. What can you tell us about Bakr Effendi himself and where he came from?
Robert, Bakr Effendi was an Ottoman scholar and who came to South Africa in 1863 in order to educate Cape Muslims in Southern Africa. He established a school in South Africa in 1863, actually, just after his arrival. Then he realized that it's not going to be easy educational activities, in South Africa, because language barrier and social cultural differences. Many things, of course, affected his life and his challenges. And then probably he was expecting to stay just a few years, but he stayed here 17 years and he even died here until his death. He stayed here. He basically spent his last almost 20 years in South Africa to educate Muslims in this shores. One of the most important contributions made by Bakr Effendi, he also realized that it won't be easy to teach the students in Arabic or Turkish. Then he wanted to find a solution, and I think best solution, as Nelson Mandela say, if you teach, if you want to speak to people, you must learn their mother language. So he made the decision, and he learned Arabic. He learned Afrikaans language. At that time in 19th century, it was more actually close to Dutch rather than Cape Africa. We can call it Cape Afrikaans, but not the Cape Afrikaans wasn't the Afrikaans like today, modern day, and it was a bit different. It was close to a Dutch language. We see this from his well-known catechism, religious book called Bayanuddin. In this book, Bakr Effendi wrote this book. Yes, he learned Afrikaans, but when he was writing, he used Arabic script. So it's very unique study, really. On the one side, you are using Arabic alphabet, but you are actually talking in Afrikaans language. That also makes it unique. I find it also important because today we are teaching students decolonization process. It happens almost in all aspects, and at universities we teach different aspects of decolonization. And if we look at what Abu Bakr Effendi did in his lifetime, it's also very important in terms of decolonial studies. He didn't force his language, Turkish or even Arabic, but what he did, he rather he taught to the for the benefit of the native Muslims in South Africa, and he rather learned the language which was most popular language at that time in Muslim society in South Africa, particularly in Bo-Kaap. And his school was actually in Bo-Kaap. One of them was in Bo-Kaap, then he established another one for girls. It was also in Bo-Kaap, in Beytenkharak Street. It's still part of Bo-Kaap. So, he learned and he taught his students in that Afrikaans. And today, if we go to Pal Language Museum in Cape Town, you can see there one room. They actually just design a room for Abu Bakr Effendi and his contribution to Arabic Afrikaans.
Yes, I've noticed as well in the literature. If you listen to the late Ahmad David, who's a specialist in this area, he talks also a lot about the influence of the Indonesian language and then the Portuguese Creole language that was spoken in the Cape at the time. So, how much influence do you think can be attributed to Arabic, and how much to Indonesian? What exactly were the social dynamics around those languages and their contribution to the Muslim community at the time?
Yes, Ahmed David was really very unique scholar also, and I mean, we cannot, unfortunately, there are some disputes amongst South African scholars regarding the studies of Ahmed David, but I believe that he was a great scholar, and his contribution was really huge, because when we look at other studies have been done by many South African scholars, by mostly South African scholars, but there are even some others, like even me. I mean, I'm originally from Turkey, but I have written about South African history and Ottoman influence in Southern Africa. Ahmed David, he really contributed to this field. Ahmed David also mentioned Arabic Afrikaans role. It played, crucial role in the history of South African Muslims history. He said that it was the most important language. That's why Abu Bakr Effendi had to learn Arabic Afrikaans. So he was, of course, fluent in Arabic already when he came to South Africa. But Afrikaans was still developing at that time in 19th century, late 19th century.
Yes.
And it became Afrikaans today, in modern sense. Ahmed David also said about Abu Bakr Effendi, when he studied on the Catechism of Abu Bakr Effendi, he said that Abu Bakr Effendi is undoubtedly an exceptional linguist. This is very profound word. I find it very interesting because basically, I mean, Abu Bakr Effendi wasn't a linguist, but if you look at his contribution from linguistic point of view, then Ahmed David is actually right. He was right about that. Because let me talk about a little bit the structure of the language, Afrikaans and Arabic. In Arabic language, there is no certain letters like P, Ch, J. You can't find them in Arabic. I mean, it's not exist. So, but it exists in Afrikaans. So when he talk about certain things in Afrikaans, he in meantime he is writing, but there is no P, Ch, J in Arabic letters. So then he created his own letters to link them, to actually explain his religious matters in Islamic teaching. So this is very unique. I mean, at that time, actually Arabic Afrikaans was also very unique language. I can't say language, but I can say maybe creation, very new creation. And Ahmed David also said that it was a unique orthographic engineering, linguistic engineering. So I always support my students to study on such a important historical matters like Arabic Afrikaans. It's actually played huge historical role in the society, Muslim society. But unfortunately, I mean, after Ahmed David, I don't think really we have another Ahmed David who seriously, have studied on this subject. They don't, unfortunately, students, they don't show interest, but that's why I always encourage them to work on Arabic Afrikaans. It's actually part of their history.
Yes. You mentioned, but Abu Bakr Effendi, of course, being a teacher of Islamic jurisprudence and so on. What was his theological impact? Because I remember reading a rather sort of peculiar story about his attempts to bring back more orthodox traditions of Sharia, like the dietary and dress code and so on. And in particular, he seemed to encounter a lot of resistance from the Cape Muslim population who were used to eating crayfish or kreef. And he seemed to have a lot of sort of difficulties in the community in that regard. What were the causes of this? Where did his thinking come from? Where would you place him in various within the world of Islamic thought?
Thank you, Robert. That's again another important question you ask. Regarding this dress code, he was absolutely right, of course. And there was also another thing, Hanafi Shafii issue. Providing jurisprudence for Muslim society, but then when they disagree with Abu Bakr Effendi, they say, oh, Abu Bakr Effendi was Hanafi, he's Hanafi, so we are Shafi. But in fact, it's not really important in Islamic tradition, because Shafi, Hanafi, or the other two, Hanbali and Malikis, they are all accepted in Islamic tradition. So we don't have any problem with Shafi. I mean, as Turkish Muslim, I go to Shafii mosques here. Normally, I am Hanafi.
Would you be able to explain to us the difference between those schools
yes,
for an outsider?
Yeah. Yes, sure. Imam Azam Abu Hanifi, actually he was the founder of the Hanafi school. He explained Islamic theories and lifestyles and some hadiths. It means Prophet Muhammad saying, or lifestyle, we call it Sunnah. Prophet Muhammad, what he did in his lifetime. So the Imam Azam Abu Hanifa, he explained these according to his understanding. And of course, these people, I mean, Imam Azam or Imam Shafii, they are great Imam. They are great Imam in history of Islam, and nobody have disagreement about this in Muslim world. They jurisprudence, only what is the difference between they live in different territories in the world. Some of them lived in Persia, other one lived in Sham, Damascus today. So of course, if lifestyle is different in those territories, even today in South Africa, or let me give you a substantial example. In Saudi Arabia, in Arabian Peninsula, people use kurta, particularly men. They use kurta. Kurta means a special dress, white color, and it's very, it's actually protected from, because it's quite hot in Saudi Arabia, but you don't have to use it in South Africa because South Africa is not that hot country.
No.
And so you can use it everywhere, of course, but doesn't mean you have to use it because Prophet Muhammad used it in Arabian Peninsula. He lived in that. Yeah, he lived in that territory, so of course he will use it because that sand, sun, hot weather, geographical conditions, everything is different in Saudi Arabia. And in South Africa, you can dress up properly. In normal way. You don't have to follow up Arabian cultural lifestyle. Arabian cultural lifestyle is nothing to do with Islamic lifestyle.
I see.
So there are a few misunderstandings also about Islamic lifestyle. There were, in fact, in 19th century South Africa. And they thought, let me give you another example. For instance, Friday pray, it's very special pray for Muslim world.
Yes.
According to Imam Shafii say that Friday pray cannot be performed less than 40 people. So Imam and other 39 people must be, 40 people must be at the mosque. Then you can perform your Friday pray. Abu Bakr Effendi is one of his students, Abdul Rakib. He was Shafi. He was actually grandson of great scholar Tuan Guru.
Yes.
And Abdul Rakib, he couldn't gather 40 people, 40 Muslims for his mosque for Friday pray. Then he asked his teacher, Abu Bakr Effendi, how can I perform if I don't perform Friday pray as an imam of this mosque, Nurul Islam, in Bo-Kaap? Then my followers, they go to other mosques. Then Abu Bakr Effendi told him, you don't have to perform it according to Imam Shafi's tradition, Shafi doctrine. You can perform it according to Hanafi doctrine. According to Hanafi doctrine, just 3 people are enough to perform Friday prayer. So when Abdul Rakib, he was happy about this decision, but when he performed this, then some Shafi imams, they criticize him. You are changing Muslims from Shafi to Hanafi. This is absolutely wrong. Because if you go to, these are detailed, of course, details for our listeners. I mean, it maybe they need some Islamic knowledge about this. They won't understand maybe. That's why I'm trying to give solid examples.
Yes.
If you go to Hajj in Mecca, you have to, in Hajj,
yes.
pilgrimage, we go to Hajj and we turn around the Kaaba 7 times. When we turn around the Kaaba, we, accidentally we touch woman, because our intention is nothing to do with the woman there. Because woman and man, they are all turning around the Kaaba and they pray there. It's special prayer in pilgrimage. According to Shafi doctrine, school, if you touch woman, your wudu is going to be abolished. You have to get again wudu. You must get wudu again, clean yourself, or wash yourself. However, according to Imam Hanafi, his school, you don't have to, accidentally, if you touch woman, if you just accidentally, if you touch woman, or not just woman, also animals like cat or dog, if you touch, then you must get again wudu. It's just a way of Shafi jurisprudence. However, all Muslims in this world, when they go to Hajj, they both become Hanafi, because there is no way to avoid from a woman or animal or whatever when you are performing your pilgrimage in Kaaba, Mecca. So that means if it is necessary, you can be Hanafi, because it's not against Islamic teaching. It's not against Quranic teaching. That's the actually most important thing we must consider. We must take into consideration. Is it against Quranic teaching, or is it against just Shafi shukul? If it's against Shafi shukul, it's not a problem at all. So that's what Bakr Effendi told his students. It's not a problem as long as you perform your Friday prayer according to Islamic tradition and Quranic teaching, you just go on. But at that time, it wasn't really easy to explain this to the Muslim society in South Africa. So they criticized Bakr Effendi, and some imam also find him a kind of threat against their popularity, because he was a professor of theology. The imams in South Africa at that time was not a very knowledgeable people. They actually, just 30 years ago, slavery was just actually abolished in South Africa. When Bakr Effendi came here, he was already professor of theology, and he even didn't mind about these things. He still continued. He didn't give up, and he taught these people in South Africa. And in fact, this is really big sacrifice for his life. He comes from century of Islamic world in Istanbul. Khilafat, Khalifa, Ottoman Caliphate was the influencing the world, Islamic world at that time. So that's why, in fact, he came from Istanbul. These things happen. About Shafi, that's another question you asked, crayfish issue.
Yes.
Crayfish issue, yeah, that's a bit different. Crayfish, according to Shafi school, you can eat anything come from sea. You can eat. It's permissible. Abu Bakr, in fact, this jurisprudence Abu Bakr Effendi showed in his book, it's also proof that Abu Bakr Effendi wasn't even Hanafi, because according to Hanafi school, crayfish is not haram. You can eat crayfish according to Hanafi school, but it's not very. You can, I mean, if there is fish, better to choose fish. If you can't find fish, so you can have it. It's like, but it's not haram at all. But Abu Bakr Effendi said that it's haram. Haram means not permissible. It's inhabitant.
Yeah.
So that's really strange, you know. But now we can't come up with another idea. And I mean, we can't just easily talk. Look, I mean, why Abu Bakr Effendi said it? We are not talking about the basic man. He was a theology of Imam, the professor of Islamic theology, professor of divinity, and also Muftul Erba. It means professor of all other madhabs.
That's a very impressive title.
Yes. So today, if you look at the medical, even medical professors, they say crayfish is not healthy. It's not healthy because it cleans the water.
I see. So,
when I actually checked this, why Abu Bakr Effendi said that. Indeed, I also checked Old Testament, because Muslim people, they believe also Judaism. It's Judaism and Christianity. They are all Abrahamic religions. They are actually real religion. I mean, they are not a pagan religion.
Yes.
We believe them. So sometimes we go back, Judaism text or Old Testament. In Old Testament, in some scripture, you can see not just pork, but also
crayfish.
Crayfish. Crayfish is haram,
yeah.
In fact,
it's not kosher.
I understand. Yes, exactly. It's not in kosher. That's why it's close to actually Islamic teaching. And even when I went to Israel for studies, I studied there a few months. I didn't really mind because I was in Israel and they don't also eat almost same thing. I mean, I didn't really mind.
Yeah, it makes life easier.
I also absolutely.
Yeah.
So that's the, I think, main issue at that time.
What I thought was quite remarkable is that the people of Cape Town, obviously the competition he had from the other imams had an influence on this.
Yes.
But the fact that they are willing to put up an actual political party called the Kreef Party just to save the right to eat kreef, it seems almost comical.
Yes, unfortunately, yeah. It even happens in other religious societies. I mean, not just in Islamic world. So I don't really, if you look at, other religious societies in 19th century, not just in Africa, in Asia or Europe, you see this. These things, controversial or disputes happen. The only thing we consider scholars. Bakr Effendi really contributed to social life, Islamic life in South Africa. And of course, as a man from another hemisphere, he will be sometimes rejected, or some his ideas. He is not a prophet, of course.
No.
So this is not very surprising story for me. A friend of mine, Shafiq Morton, in Cape Town, he also writes about Bakr Effendi now. He is a journalist, quite senior journalist in Cape Town. Sometimes he sent me his text. He's still busy with writing. He asked me, how about this? What do you think about Bakr Effendi's writing on the subject? And today he also said that, I think it was quite tough for him to explain himself. Even he was not speaking to people in his mother language. We must consider all these things. He came all the way from Turkey and tried to explain his theories and teachings in very different Muslim society. Sometimes he gave up even. I see this in his letters. He sent it to Istanbul. They're written in Ottoman language. I read them, and sometimes he says it's not easy to teach these people because there are lots of controversial subjects. They think they believe many false as real Islamic principles.
Yes. They were living under a Christian dominion, and there was some degree of oppression of Islam during the 19th century, and I imagine it would have been they would have had limited access to learned scholars or learned imams, and Sharia can, at least it was in those times, as I understand it, more accommodating of local differences and local cultural features, and so I can imagine in that environment it could drift quite far from orthodoxy.
Yes, sure. Also, there was a very well-known writer, Dorothea. I forgot her surname. From 19th century, she wrote an article. She wrote a book, Pilgrim to Cape. Muslim Pilgrim to Cape. Name of his book. Very interesting book. In her book, she said that in 19th century, I can imagine. When I read her book, she's just walking around Cape Town at that time. Cape Town was beautiful, of course, still beautiful, and she observed everything, and also Muslim people. She also observed Muslims' lifestyle in Bo-Kaap. And she said that I saw Malay Muslim girls. They have very beautiful hairs, and they use coconut oil to polish their hairs. But unfortunately, an Ottoman scholar came here a few years ago, and now all those beautiful Malay girls cover their hairs. So that's very interesting.
Well, you see, so his contribution would be that before he came, Cape Muslims didn't wear the veil.
That's what we see, of course. That's what we even see from the travelers and other contemporary source. So I actually spoke to some scholars here. They are my colleagues, Muslim scholars, like Professor Mohammed Harun. And he said to me, they kept Muslim women, they were not like properly, 19th century, they were not properly covered their hair like it happened in Turkey or in Arabian Peninsula. But Abu Bakr Effendi showed them actually proper way in Islamic tradition how you should do that. And then they changed. In fact, there is a very nice article also written by Jackie Lewis, Capetonian journalist, very senior journalist. She studied on this subject even before I came to South Africa. She's according to me, she is actually one of the best writers regarding this subject. She found a photo of Cape Muslim woman before Abu Bakr Effendi came and after Abu Bakr Effendi. So that's very unique. You can see that there is huge difference between.
Oh wow!
Even Ahmed David say that also. He also wrote this in his book, very well-known book, Mosques of Bo-Kaap.
Oh yes, yeah. That's still on my to-read list. I'm afraid when I was brushing up, I only stuck with his scholarly articles. So he's more accessible. One of the other things that I've noticed that you research is also the descendants of Abu Bakr Effendi, who themselves had an impact on life in the Cape,
yes.
And on the museum in Bo-Kaap.
Yes, right. In fact, Robert, the museum in Bo-Kaap is not. Doesn't belong to the descendant of Abu Bakr Effendi. It belongs to another Effendi, another Ottoman scholar, who was appointed after the death of Abu Bakr Effendi.
I see.
Mahmud Faki Effendi. His grandchildren also live in South Africa, Cape Town, but the family is completely different.
I see.
There was a huge really contribution if you look at from that time when Abu Bakr Effendi came to South Africa and until today. Abu Bakr Effendi's son, eldest son, Ahmet Effendi, he also established school in Kimberley. And Ahmet Effendi, one of the most actually knowledgeable Muslims in South Africa, he fought also against colonialism and racial discrimination.
In what capacity did he do that? That must have been quite a challenge at the time.
Yes, if you also again check what Ahmed David wrote about him, Ahmed David said Ahmet Ataullah Effendi was the first black person. Sorry, he said he was the first Muslim who stand black person in black people in South Africa. So in Cape Parliament, of course. So basically,
he was the first non-white representative in the Cape.
Like that, yeah, exactly. Yes, we can also say it that way.
Yes, I have to. I know it's kind of politically incorrect now to phrase things in that manner, but I think it can be a little confusing for people because black can tend to mean black African, and at the time the word changed usage quite a lot, and so at the time it's referring also to people who are of Asian, East Asian and Near East descent.
Yes, today not just today, but even apartheid time, there was a misconception about blackness and whiteness. Many, in fact, the descendants of Abu Bakr Effendi were regarded as non-white. So they are actually Turkish, and they are quite white skin color. They have a white skin color. But because of their religious identity, they were regarded as non-white.
Yes.
Let's say black. And his grandson, Muhammad Shukri Effendi, was the first Muslim, of course, also black, who become a black. He graduated from University of Cape Town as medical doctor. Muhammad Shukri Effendi. I wrote about him a few years ago. It published it in university. So we discussed these things even with students, with scholars at UCT, when it's quite understandable. I mean, religious identity played important role in, not just in apartheid time, even before apartheid time, post-apartheid time. So we cannot just say that, I mean, white skin color are white and black skin colors
Yes.
are black. So that's not, there are always exceptions, I mean.
Yes, I mean, South Africa is very peculiar that way, because while a lot of people in the Western world think of white and black in terms of very, very strict genetic categories, South Africa very much leaned on the cultural dimension. And so, for example, Greeks and Turks, who would be genetically identical, basically, are categorized as white and black, respectively, because of their cultures.
Right. I mean, history is not like today, you know, Malema's speeches in parliament, or it's completely different.
Yes. No, the one of the bigger figures that comes up a lot, and preceded Abu Bakr Effendi by some decades, was Tuan Guru, and there's a lot made of his impact. Could you elaborate on that for the viewers?
Yeah, Tuan Guru, actually he wasn't a scholar. He was the prince of Tidore Islands in Indonesia. And he came to he was actually sent to South Africa as a political prisoner. But of course, as a prince of Tidore Island, he was very well educated Muslim. So he came to South Africa and he was in prison in Robben Island for years. Then he memorized Quran as well. So we call it Hafiz. So I mean, he can read Quran from his heart. He taught many, prisoners when he was also in prison in Robben Island. So he became kind of legendary man. In fact, he was very. His role is very special in Muslim society in South Africa. I also respect his challenges and struggles. Then, when he came out from the prison, Robben Island, he established the first mosque, oval mosque in Bo-Kaap, and he started to teach his students there. Even his life is interesting. There is a very interesting example that show us. In fact, Abu Bakr Effendi he wasn't alone who was hitting the wall sometimes in Muslim society. When Tuan Guru died, Tuan Guru left the Khalif, his successor. He left the successor. He said, this man is going to be leader of this mosque, so you must follow him. And they didn't. He died, but they didn't actually follow this man. Then the first religious dispute actually happened at that mosque, and some Muslims, they followed another imam, and they opened another mosque it's called Palm Tree Mosque in Long Street. So even Tuan Guru, he was such a big man, and he taught these Muslims. That's why most of Muslims in South Africa are following Shafii's school, because of his teaching. He was Shafii. And of course, many other scholars from religious leaders from Indonesia and Malaysia. They were also Shafi. So when Abu Bakr Effendi say that this is not compulsory to be compulsory to follow Shafi school here, you can follow Hanafi school if you resolve this issue. It's same thing actually when Tuan Guru say that this man is an abler man. He's capable to hold the status. He is the man, religious leader. But sometimes even such a charismatic scholar like Tuan Guru or religious leader, they didn't even listen to him. So they established another mosque in Palm Tree, in Long City, Palm Tree Mosque, and then it actually has been going on for years and years. How many mosques we have in Bo-Kaap today? More than 40. Why do you think? Normally it's actually against that's against actually Islamic teaching. You cannot that's create a heresy if you have another mosque just in the same street. Because how many people, you don't need another mosque there. There are not that much population. We are not in Istanbul, almost 20 million people.
What's the reasoning behind that?
Because you can create another, if the society needs mosque, you must establish mosque there. If there is a conflict there, you cannot establish a mosque because there is a conflict between Muslim groups. There is no such a excuse. There's not an excuse in Islamic teaching.
Oh, I see it. So then it would be an act of vanity on the part of the imam who's setting up the new mosque, and it would divide the community.
Of course, it divides the community and becomes kind of party, like a political party. It's against Islamic tradition.
I see.
If you have a financial wealth, you can establish school rather than establishing another mosque. It was all about actually leadership issue, which Ahmed David actually explained it very well in his studies.
I see. Well, this is obviously a thing that's a feature in the Cape a lot. We tend to be a very divided and very argumentative part of the country in our quiet way.
Yes.
But I've noticed recently there's been a lot more. There's been influence from further abroad. We're mostly a Sunni community in Cape Town. I've noticed recently there've been more influence from the Salafi schools and sometimes even from the Wahhabists from Saudi Arabia.
Yes, yeah.
Yeah. To what? How different are those schools from the Shafii school of Islam that's been sort of established in the Cape for so long?
These are like Shafi we just mentioned now, Shafi, Hanafi, or Maliki, Hanbali. They are all Sunni schools. They are all accepted in majority of Islamic world. But Salafism and Wahhabis, they are just new creation. New creation means just few centuries ago, 2 centuries ago, they wanted to go. What is their idea? Salafis or Wahhabis. They say there is no. For instance, they break down all the tombstones. They think we are worshipping tombstones, which is solid, but it's absolutely nonsense. Nobody. Islam is not a paganic in religion. We don't. We just see tombstones as, you know, when people die, you just show that actually this site is burial site, it's a cemetery. You cannot put there something else. It's because it's cemetery. You respect also your dead. Because in also Prophet Muhammad say that remember death, and how you remember it, of course you go and visit cemeteries, you look after cemeteries. It's also respect your ancestors. Wahhabis, they break down, they demolish all tombstones, and they, according to them, they are actually following the right way. They follow what Prophet Muhammad left as Islamic legacy behind. But of course, all Sunni scholars and Sunni world, Muslim world, against these ideas. And there is another controversial Muslim group here in Cape Town called Ahmedis, Ahmediya movement. It's or they some of them call themselves as Chaldeanis. This is another interesting story.
Yes.
In 19th century, a scholar, Mirza Ghulam Ahmed from Chaldean, today in Pakistan, he was in fact a well-known scholar at that time. He wrote few books, and he was bringing another dimension to Islamic society. And in 19th century, there were lots of conflicts in Muslim world. Ottoman Empire was about to decline also. So some scholars like him, they try to find solution for Muslim world. How we can re-image or how we can survive in this world, flourish in the world. And he found some ideas in peaceful way, but then in 1906 he proclaimed his prophecy. He said, "I am actually prophet."
Oh, I see.
According to Islamic teaching, after the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, there is no any prophecy. Let's see. Prophet Muhammad actually completed prophecy. That's what actually Quran is telling us. Khatamul Nabiyyun in Arabic. It means the last prophet in Muslim world.
So then this is a very big heresy.
Absolutely. And they are regarded as a heretical movement in Muslim world everywhere. But imagine they have more than 20 million followers.
What time did they emerge? When did they emerge?
They emerged in 1906. Okay. Let's say beginning of 90s. And they became very huge Muslim group. I mean, it's in Pakistan government, they don't accept them as Muslim. They call them Ahmedis. They give them another ID, I mean, even passport, and they are not allowed to go to Mecca.
My goodness. They are not
Muslim. Yeah, it's become a big political issue, in fact, everywhere. Now, but in South Africa, there is no such a statement.
Because we're secular.
Yes, yeah. South Africa, they go to everywhere. I mean, they go to Hajj, Mecca, for pilgrimage. And however, if you speak to them, I spoke to many Ahmedis here, and they are very peacemaker people. I mean, doesn't mean I accept what they say, but I don't think, I mean, the other Muslims, they call them kafir. It's a big word in especially South Africa. It means infidel.
Yes.
But according to Islamic teaching also, if someone say that God is the one and Prophet Muhammad is a messenger, you cannot call them as kafir or infidel. You don't have that authority. Only Allah knows who they are. But
yes.
Unfortunately, radicalism is everywhere. And they were regarded as heretical. And yes, some of the statements are heretical, but it's not. I don't believe that calling them infidel is right. It's another radicalism now.
Yes, no, I can see this being very big. There's the 20th century saw a lot of shall we say innovations in Islam that have led to a lot of radicalism. And being that you're an Ottoman scholar who would understand this quite well, I understand that the demolition of the Ottoman Empire by the Western powers at the end of World War I, particularly the deposition of the Caliph, that had a really, really seismic impact on the Islamic world. How would you characterize that for someone who's outside of it? Because to me, that seems like such a seismic, enormous event.
Yes. Ottoman Caliphate played an important role in Muslim world, especially after the Ottoman-Russian War. Ottoman-Russian War. Ottoman Empire, in fact, they got the Caliphate in 1517 when Ottoman Sultan Yavuz Selim, he entered Egypt. He got the Caliphate there, Islamic Caliphate. But he didn't really need it or he didn't use it really. He got the Caliphate, but he said that he called himself Khadimul Haramain. It means servant of Mecca and Medina. So since then, every Ottoman sultans, they call themselves Khadimul Haramain. They are servant of Mecca. But also they were, of course, Khalif. But Caliphate was very influential. In fact, after 1850s, Ottoman Caliphate became very influential because, as you said, Ottoman Empire was about actually demolish. I mean, it was falling, and the Ottoman sultans, they wanted to use another political power. Of course, Caliphate was very important. They used, what they did, they established schools in other countries, not just in Anatolia or Balkans, where Ottoman Empire directly ruled and lived, but also Africa, even Southern Africa, China, Siberia. Ottoman Empire sent scholars to Indonesia in 19th century, late 19th century, or let's say second half of 19th century. In fact, Bakr Effendi is a good example about this. He came here, he was paid by Ottoman Empire, Ottoman Caliph, and he died. Until his death, Ottoman Empire never neglect Muslim society here. It was not just about education, but also Ottoman Caliphate. Its influence, they were controlling Muslim world. And of course, serving Muslim people everywhere. So I just try to remember his name. Well-known Orientalist Redhouse, William Redhouse. he wrote a book about, kind of pamphlet about Caliphate, Ottoman Caliphate. Even he said that Ottoman Caliphate, he said Ottoman Caliphs, they did not get the Caliphate just, because of the military power. They deserve Islamic Caliphate because they sent scholars, they established schools in even Southern Africa, and they even sent a scholar to professor of Islamic law to Kreef Party. So he wrote this out. He wrote this in 1873. I mean, even English Orientalists or Dutch Orientalists like Sunok. I am not sure if I pronounce his surname right. Horzena Sunok, I think.
How would you spell that?
S-N-O-C-K.
Oh, that would be snook, yes, like the fish.
Like fish, yeah. But he was very influential Dutch Orientalist. He also wrote two books in Mecca. His well-known book is Mecca, and it's actually explain Ottoman life and Muslims in Mecca in 19th century.
Oh, wow.
Even it's very interesting book. And of course, he wrote it in Dutch language, but it was translated to English and Turkish. Fantastic. It's actually quite extensive study because it's 2 volumes.
Now, the downfall of the Caliph, from what you've been describing, it seems like the schools that they set up, it sort of bound together much of the Islamic world. It became the glue of the Islamic world, theologically speaking. Was there, what would you say how should I put this? When the Caliph fell apart, how was that loss of influence and cohesion felt in the Cape?
It wasn't really political. I mean, Ottoman Sultans, Caliphs, they didn't really think it. They didn't really consider it as a political power. They just realized that they need to get support from Muslim world because now there is no much military power anymore. West is in advance already, and now they have to use Muslim power, and especially to unity of Islam. They must take this power and control the Muslim world. I give you a very interesting example. As we mentioned earlier, Ottoman Sultans, they sent Bakr Effendi and some other scholars to China or Cape Town or other parts of the world. They established a university in China, Ahmedi University. But what happened? Muslim people, they really took this into consideration. They say that how our Caliph is great man. He is even take care of us, and he sent us scholars, established schools. He sent us books, Quranic teachings, and helping. He is helping us. Even we are not sending anything to him. But what happened in the First World War? Even before First World War, there was an Italian war there was a war in Libya between Italy and Turkey. Italian-Turkish war. in 1912. Very interesting. Muslims from Mozambique, Comor, Mauritius, South Africa, they gathered money and they sent it to Istanbul to support the Muslims, Ottoman army in Libya. So this is really unique historical event. If we think about, Caliphate and its influence in the Muslim world. So imagine, people in Mozambique, I'm sure they even never been in Libya, or they never been in Balkans, but they sent donation to son of children of martyrs who died in Balkan wars. So it's very unique.
Yes, I mean the Muslim community in the Cape, for example, is very big on charitable giving. Gift of the Givers, for example, is one of the biggest charities in the country, and one of the few sources for relief when things break down, particularly as they have in the Eastern Cape recently after the economic collapse.
Yes, absolutely.
Would you? I want to. Yeah.
I'm sorry. During the First World War, Ottoman sultans actually the Cape Muslims, they were asking religious jurisprudence to Ottoman Caliphate. Still, Ottoman Caliphate was active. Imagine, I have this documents. I found them in actually Cape Archive. Here in Cape Town, and some of them I find sometimes their answer in Ottoman archive. That's actually the most interesting part of my studies in South Africa, because South African scholars, Muslim scholars particularly, they country to Ottoman Turkish, they only have access Cape Archive or South African archives in Pretoria, National Archives. But when you compare it with other source, most of times I get actually response from the Ottoman archive. The letter they sent from Cape to Istanbul, and when I accessed Ottoman archives in Istanbul, there are lots of interesting stories, and you can see the puzzle really is complete there. Therefore, these studies take quite long. It's not easy job, but it's very unique historical. This history doesn't only belong to South Africa, but it belongs to also all Muslim world. That's why I am glad to contribute to studies in South Africa.
Yes, no, it's been wonderful hearing the things that you've studied, and I'm glad that there's someone still around to preserve and spread that knowledge around. It's been wonderful having you on. Thank you for talking to us.
Thank you very much.
It's a pleasure. All right, everyone. Good night.